pre-show quid pro quo. Patrick, you get one question. It can be any question in the world. It can be about what my favorite movie is. It could be who's my favorite hockey player. It can be any question. Go ahead and ask it.
Well, it does involve hockey.
Does it actually?
It does, yes.
Okay, amazing.
So, being a hockey fan and
very much
our mutual young hero,
Mr. Connor
McDavid, is it merely a metaphor, the use of magic to describe great athleticism?
No, I think it's strange because I think, and we'll get into it this episode, a lot of what people want to consider magic is very passive. No, it requires a lot of work. It really does. I think what Connor McDavid did from a very young age, athletes in general that are at the peak of their sport, they put in just a ton of work, and they're constantly reevaluating their work. It's not just that they're doing the work itself, but they're actually thinking about what they're doing. Connor McDavid's genius or magic comes from the fact that he's a skilled player, but he can also think as fast as he moves, which is in some way, I'd say it's a form of magic. He leaves people that he plays with in awe. People that he plays against, they're just like, you can't do anything with somebody like this. It is some kind of a magic. And it may be one of those things where we can look at, his muscle mass and the speed that he skates at. But to actually be able to process things at that speed, that's something else. That's something that you're not just born with that, you create that. Right, the act of creation it's part of the magical process.
I was chatting with somebody who's at the game here in Toronto before the end of the year, where he scored that goal where he faked, and
maybe
he said that 19,000 people or however many are in the stadium, everyone was gasping. He said you could feel it in the air.
When you're in the presence of somebody like that, we would consider their magic, you just stand back and you're like, I can't believe that.
So it's really magic.
It's really magic. Okay. I'd say so.
Good.
It's good. And here's the strange thing. It's going to be remembered, Patrick. That's the other thing. That goal. I know it's specifically the one you were talking about.
Yeah.
Against a great defenseman. That goal is going to be like, till the end of time.
No,
till hockey's not a sport anymore. That's one of those goals that people will be like, I saw that. I remember that.
I was in India when it happened, and I was showing it to everyone there. And people that hadn't watched hockey once in their lives, they could, I think, even without the context of knowing the game, see that something special had happened.
Yeah. No, it really is. No,
now all your listeners are going to be like, what?
What is Doug talking about? It had to happen sometime. I do enjoy hockey. Hey everybody, welcome to What Magic Is This? A podcast that wonders where on your astral body are you ticklish? In this show, we're going to be going through magic, the occult, the esoteric, the supernatural, the paranormal, and the weird. If you have not tuned into the show before, basically what happens is that I give my guests, who most of the time they don't know anything about magic or the occult, I give them a list of 25 topics. They get to choose a topic. I bring them in. We record. Yeah, that's kind of what it is. And it's more like sitting in on like a tutor session about a certain topic of magic. So that's the gist of the show. I am joined today by a very special guest, Patrick. How are you, Patrick?
Very good, Doug. Glad to be here.
Patrick is probably my oldest friend that I've had on the show. Not old in age, but I've been friends with him longer than anybody else on this show. I believe I met you in 2005. We worked at a video school in Edmonton, Alberta.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things that didn't take very long for us to become somewhat fast friends.
Yeah, indeed.
You were also one of the only people that, until I released my podcast, that knew about my magical proclivities. And do you have any stories of early magic, Doug?
Yes. I remember, I think you were the first person, and maybe the only person I've ever known who said the name Giordano Bruno aloud. Yeah, okay. I'd only seen, and I can remember being at a party once, and it was late at night, and we had outlasted most of the people at the party, and suddenly it was a hoodie, but a medieval hoodie. It was there was something about the hood, and it came way out over your eyes, and I thought, who is this kid? And I just your tastes, your passions in general were always very striking, and one of the first things was obvious about you.
Oh, so. Thank you, Patrick. That's very kind of you. Say, I'm going to give some back. Patrick is, in my opinion, probably the smartest person I know. And Patrick just says, because I got your answer already. You're going to say, no, I'm just well-read. That's what you were going to say, wasn't it?
Well,
But I think that I've had more in-depth and introspective conversations with Patrick than I've had, I think, with any human being that I've meant in my life. Patrick.
Wow.
Patrick is stunning, and for a period of time we lived together, and just to be where he was, surrounded by his books, was a boon. Almost every day of waking up is just, oh, there's a book for that.
Well, it takes one to know one. You're a book lover yourself. So.
I am, but different kind of book selection. To have all of your work kind of in one place was very instrumental in that. Those couple of years were fantastic. I miss him. But
no.
What can you do? So, Patrick, you've chosen a very interesting topic today. You've taken on the topic of alchemy. I just want people to know right off the get-go, there's tons to go through in this episode. I did more research on this episode than any other episode. I know that I say that with every episode, but this one really, it was taxing. It was a lot to go through. I probably went through about 30 books just on this episode. It's just, I had books all over the place. Books in my study, books in my living room, books going into the bathroom even. It was crazy. And never in an episode was it where I would try to go to sleep and I had to bring my notepad because it was like, oh, I have to talk about this. I have to talk about this.
I was surprised it was still up for grabs. For a non-practitioner. I know very little. For all I know, and I'm going to let your listenership down. At least I'll represent ignorance as coherently as I can. But it's one of the great question marks in my mind, and I was surprised that, because you've been at this for some time now, that it was still up for grabs. So
no, I'm quite surprised myself. So let's get into it, Patrick. The term alchemy. There is some confusion as to the term and name alchemy. The immediate derivative is Arabic for alchemia. Al is basically the word the. The second word is a bit more problematic. Chem is the Egyptian word for black. Egypt was known as the Black Land, land of black soil, because it had the Nile, so it was a place of fecundity with nature. The Red Land was the desert. In a way, alchemy could mean the Egyptian art or the black art, which sounds awesome, right? But most scholars, of which there are tons regarding European or Western alchemy, there's so many of them, they seem to think that it comes from the Greek word chemia, which is casting or fusing of metal. Even more confusing is that this word itself comes from chian, which is Greek for to pour out. This word also has a variant such as chemas, which means plant juice. So you can almost kind of see squeezing a rock to get the metals out, and once metal has been forged, pouring it out almost looks like plant juice. So you can see the similarities there, metal flowing like plant juice. So, what is alchemy? Patrick, what comes to mind, just as somebody who, you've read a lot and you kind of specialize in the history of science as well as the history of philosophy and whatnot. What comes to mind when I say alchemy?
Well, as we've discussed a little bit just over the course of our knowing each other, I would say I knew next to nothing. It's generally treated as an antecedent to what became chemistry,
right.
And that's it's probably something you're going to talk a little bit about. But through Carl Jung, obviously, I think it's using it metaphorically, and I think explicitly metaphorically, but maybe you'll shed light on that too.
But what are the images that come to your mind when I say alchemy?
I guess I'm thinking of it almost in a cartoonish like sense of transmuting something into something else.
Bingo, yeah. Somebody sitting in a laboratory. Or
distilling spirits and sulfur and
exactly. You hit the nail on the head. Many definitions as to what is alchemy are there, but they all seem to land on one word, and that word is transmutation. Transmutation is an event in which one substance is changed into another, right? So it has been commonly misunderstood, alchemy, as a futile effort to turn lead or other metals into gold, or a precursor of modern chemistry and science, or a primitive form of psychology. So you nailed it, Patrick. You got them all. Yes. What can be said about alchemy is that the term is retro-projected onto many complex disciplines, unified by a common theoretical framework, that of transmutation. It was huge. It was enormous. People don't realize this. It was enormous. Reaching across centuries, and for a time, it extended into nearly every aspect of human experience. I just gotta also say, guys, Chinese and Indian and Eastern alchemy has its own lore, and if alchemy is your thing, there is a ton to go off there should you choose to investigate it. However, in this episode, we will be centering on what has been called European or Western alchemy. So let's get into a bit of the history. A history of alchemy is tricky. It has numerous origin stories. Many place Egypt as the home of alchemy, yet those that do place everything mystical as Egypt's stock and trade, for a reason. But as far as this is concerned, if you look at Egyptian artifacts, King Tutankhamun's death mask and whatnot, you could obviously see these people were very good at working with metal. Like all of the trinkets, all of the amulets, all of the bracelets. They were good at what they did. It is my opinion, though, that this is not necessarily the case. Its origins, as we can understand alchemy, it lays with, as many things do, with the Greeks. The Greeks were masters of syncretism. The alchemical tradition basically began as Greeks fused their philosophy with the cultural legacies of Egypt and Mesopotamia. Both, again, very good metallurgists. Mesopotamia itself, they would attach images to metals and whatnot. I think gold was seen as an eagle. The sacred and practical to those cultures, they blended, but with the Greek emphasis for finding truth, finding the one thing that brings everything together, whether that be a substance or an idea. By the 3rd century BCE, we have figures such as Bolus of Mendes, also known as Democritus or Democritus. He wrote catalogs of occult or hidden properties of substances and organisms, as well as their uses. He also warned of men's impunity to separate the spirit of themselves from the material body, specifically through imbibing certain things. There's actually quite a lot to learn from Bolus. I think that we should have to go there. Of course, we can't talk about alchemy without talking about Empedocles, who basically kind of separated everything in the world that's material into 4 elements. That would be air, water, earth, and fire. The Greeks, they went everywhere. We also get Zosimus, who took a bunch of pseudo-alchemical work and blended them Greekily. He was a great compiler of information, very certainly familiar and versed in Hermeticism or Hermetism. More on that in a bit. There was a quote from his work, yet attributed to the Persian alchemist Ostanes: "Go to the waters of the Nile, and there you will find a stone that has a spirit. Take this, divide it, thrust it in your hand, and draw out its heart, for its soul is in its heart." And Zosimus is basically who we can kind of attribute to the philosopher's stone. The idea that there is a stone that is not a stone, an elixir or something that once you have it can make things change immediately. It can transmute things by merely acquiring it or having it. And the alchemist's work is to either create or find this philosopher's stone. It's a magical catalyst, and as I said, the point of alchemy. We have to talk a little bit about Hermeticism. Very early alchemy and Hermeticism fused. It has to do with the main texts that we consider Hermetic, things like the Corpus Hermeticum, Asclepius, and more to do with what is called the Tabula Smaragdina, which is the emerald tablet. That's where you get things like as above, so below. Alchemy eventually entered the Arab world as the Persians, who were harboring a lot of Greek, Christian, and other ideologies. They eventually were conquered by the Arabs in the 8th century. Alchemy flourished, and we have figures such as Jabir ibn Hayyan, also called Geber. There's a story that that's where we get the word gibberish from. The story is definitely apocryphal, but his work is somewhat hard to read. But yes, he was one of the first Arab alchemists who we know a lot about. He massively improved alchemy, its theory as well as its practice. To the Arab alchemists, their theurgy was chemistry and metallurgy. We have to understand that. Rome falls, and Europe is cut off from Arabia for a little bit. In 1144, Robert of Chester, he translates Arabic alchemical texts into Latin. Arabic texts, their ideas caught on quite quickly, but the obscurity of alchemy as well as the equipment involved took about another 100 years after Robert of Chester did his thing before it started to catch on. But it did eventually create a subculture within main continental Europe and eventually into the United Kingdom. The Renaissance happened. There was a rediscovery of Hermeticism and Neoplatonism, which had an enormously profound effect on alchemy. Alchemy became very esoteric as opposed to very practical. The European heyday of alchemy is about from the 13th to the 16th century. The popularity of alchemy kind of ebbed and flowed. Eventually, mystical orders, whether not real or not, like Rosicrucianism or Freemasonry, they kept the flame alive, but they eventually eclipsed alchemy. And by the 19th century, alchemy was a curiosity, less so a theoretical framework. Let's talk a little bit more about the exoteric versus esoteric sides of alchemy. Exoteric. The understanding that the public has about alchemy is the one that you have in your mind of somebody in a laboratory, smoke everywhere, creating strange elixirs and whatnot. Certainly people thought that this was practical alchemy. Gold was placed by the alchemists as the highest point, the highest metal. I think if you were to go through the hierarchy of metals, I believe it's lead, iron, tin, copper, mercury, silver, gold, to turn lead to gold. This is kind of the previous form that we had of chemistry. These people that did this kind of thing, they were called puffers, in England at least. But yes, the public's view of alchemy has not changed a bit on this. Puffers, I guess he was considered an alchemist, was Edward Kelly. Are you aware of Kelly?
No, I can't say I have.
He was John Dee's scryer. They were taking a trip through Europe, and at one point, Edward Kelly separated from John Dee, saying, fuck you, I can do my own thing. It was 1589. He eventually found himself in the court of Rudolf II in Prague. He was given his own castle, he was given his own title, and he said that I could produce gold. Don't you worry, king, your kingdom's fine, I will produce gold. He was eventually imprisoned for killing a guy in a duel, but most likely he was imprisoned because it's a warning to the king to, like, hurry it up, buddy. Do what you say you did. He was released. All of his titles came back. He was able to go back to his house and do that alchemy. And he had absolutely nothing. He did not produce anything. And Rudolf II imprisoned him again, and he died trying to escape. John Dee himself, we know, was an alchemist, but it wasn't his major pursuit. We know that for a fact he went to Europe earlier on in his magical career. He bought a bunch of equipment. Eventually, it came back to England with him. He became very sick shortly after. Queen Elizabeth was actually like, this man, Queen Elizabeth I, obviously, was like, this man's very important to me. She sent all of her best doctors to look at Dee. They were like, we don't know what's going on. It was probably from working with gases and whatnot. Yeah. He didn't do anything by half measures. He was all in all the time. But we definitely know that he was an alchemist. What we know for sure is that practical alchemy was mostly engaged with the more wealthy people within a society, the more elite people. And there's this other side of alchemy, though, and that's kind of the more esoteric side. Talking to most people now, and even at the time, they would say that this is the actual point of alchemy, turning man into gold or being an enlightened being. Like you start off life as a base metal, and then eventually if you do these things, either contemplation through your hard work or just contemplation itself, that you will become gold. You will become this enlightened being. Alchemy started out of syncretism and remains that way. It blended Hermeticism and Neoplatonism and Christianity. Neoplatonism more so that they could kind of get away with not being cast as diabolic or a witch, which it was a thing at the time. I think it might be overstated quite a bit. They're working with metaphors and the things that they were writing in their notebook, kind of what we'd see as alchemical symbols. That was just part of it, I think, was for show, but part of it was also just like, I'm not doing work with demons or the devil. I am doing this so that eventually I can rise up into the immaterial realm to be one with the monist god, blah 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 blah. I'm not being evil. I'm doing this thing. It's part of Christianity. Anyways, Zosimus, who I talked about earlier, he was big on this idea of creating like a god man, the enlightened being, which I think that's what most people think is the real point of alchemy.
That association of getting up to something demonic or not, sanctioned by God in the mainstream religious community, and the association of sulfur, which stinks.
It does stink.
And I don't know, but aren't there, the devil's breath is sulfur, right. It's just this rotten egg smell. Have you come across that, where
I could actually
people smell this horrible smell and think that these wizards are up to no good? That kind
perhaps,
of thing?
Perhaps.
I guess I just wonder, you think of like the story you just told of John Dee possibly dying because of his
he was
poisoning.
Very ill. Yeah, he basically poisoned himself.
So walking past these wooden houses and this distinct smell of rot, or what it must have conjured in people's minds.
Exactly, of course you did. And working with all these chemicals, it's not like something you can just hide, right? It's very out in the open. It requires a laboratory. Details of this transmutation, or known to the alchemists as the Great Work, is very detailed. There's a lot of minutiae. It is interesting. If you guys want to go for it, there's the Anima Mundi, putrefaction, circulation, transmutation, exaltation, distillation. purification, all of this kind of stuff. Like, that's the prima materia. There's tons. I'm not going to get into it too much. There's so much literature on it. If that's your jam, go for it. I'm not going to go into it too much. Personally, it seems a bit boring and rudimentary to me. I get its appeal, but there you go. That's my 2 cents. Alchemy is highly symbolic. Look at the pictures. The one major legacy that we have from Alchemy is just all the amazing artwork that Alchemy produced. It's fantastic. And there's tons of it. But the other idea is why did it become esoteric? How did something that was practical become esoteric in some way? And that is something we're going to get into called the mystery tradition. Now, I remember having my brain absolutely melted reading a book called The Techniques of Greco-Egyptian Magic by Dr. Stephen Skinner. He said that pre-Abrahamic religions, we had 3 things in which we could activate or work with the uncanny or the ethereal or the esoteric. First of all, you had religion, which was open and it was public. You could go to temples. You could go to sacred areas. Secondly, you had what was called the teletai. It was the mysteries, the mysterious. It was private. Some priests engaged in it, but also a lot of regular people were engaged. It was like, hey, I understand you like the religion, but you might have something here. You would kind of be initiated into a mystical tradition, and it would be very God-specific, either Apollo or Zeus or any of the Greek gods. And this was something that ran through basically from Plato going forward.
What about Hermes? Was he? Were there
he was a bit later. He
cults
was a bit
of-
later on.
Okay.
Yeah, that was Ptolemaic Egypt when that started to catch on. But this is before. But it was part. Like, that was part of the mystery tradition, very much so. And then the third thing that you have was magic, which was very private. And it was practiced by priests sometimes, but it was mostly by regular people. They had their religion, but they also had their magic. Magic was objective aims to have things happen materially in your life, and it was personal, and it was proactive in some way. Judeo-Christian and Near East monotheism, they didn't so much as crush magic, but what they did was incredible. They got rid of the mystery tradition. They just crushed it. Gone. If anything, they kind of wrapped it in with the priest classes. This is something that we no longer had. These 3 distinctions, now we were only left with 2. And they were incredibly attractive, the mystery tradition. To this day, I'd say that most people that get into magic are actually more interested in what we now understand as this mystery tradition. And alchemy, Neoplatonism, and Hermeticism, or a combination of all 3, they satisfied this seemingly natural hunger for this mystery tradition. You could still do it within the framework of the church.
I read in Robin Lane Fox's Pagans and Christians, he's sort of musing at one point. He says, if there's a sound that can be associated with the rise of Christianity, it's the hewing of wood, because they cut down all the forests and shrines that were pilgrimage sites, these places where they'd have various shrines set up. Yeah.
That was a very important thing. We had these things. Looking back now, it's like it's a near curiosity. Nobody's taught this. People just thought that you had the church and then you just had people doing magic. There was another way to get in touch with the ephemeral, and it was through these mystery schools, and it was through the mystery tradition. Yeah, it's Neoplatonism. I'm studying the occult. I'm studying in occult things, but I'm still in the pursuit of the Heavenly Father, or the One, and the monism of the Judeo-Christian religions kind of allowed that. Will allow you your Neoplatonism and a little bit of your Hermeticism, because they have their heavenly realms. You have, I think it was Dionysus or Pseudo-Dionysus the Areopagite. He created the celestial hierarchy, the thing that we kind of know how the god, the angels, blah, 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 and Neoplatonism kind of wrapped itself around that. It's like, let's go for this. To this day, this reclaiming of the mystery tradition through alchemy, Neoplatonism, and Hermeticism is seen as the underlying metaphysics of magic, which is something that I, for one, want to rectify. We'll not get into it in this episode, probably in the Neoplatonism episode, but I don't think that is a very good metaphysical framework for magic. Anyways, no more so is the division from alchemy being a practical pursuit to more of an esoteric philosophical pursuit is through the story of one person, and by the name of Paracelsus. And I might get some people saying, his name is Paracelsus. I'm going to go with the whole Dan Carlin hardcore history thing where he pissed off a bunch of people by saying it's not Genghis Khan, it's Genghis Khan. So Paracelsus would pronounce his name Paracelsus. I'm just going to go with that.
Kikero.
Deal with it. He is the first of the notable alchemists that I'm going to go through here, where he basically said that magic is not sorcery, but supreme wisdom. He's one of the main reasons that alchemy became less practical, as I just said. The true goal of alchemy was spiritual transformation. He also said, I am a lover of divine wisdom in men and in nature. This is the magic I follow. He was born in 1493. He died in 1541. His real name was Philippus Aurelius Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. All right. And some people say that the word bombastic comes from his name, Bombastus. That's not true. Bombast was actually kind of stuffing people put in their clothing. He's considered one of the founders of modern medicine. Really, he created non-herbal medicine. He coined the term alcohol, which, not really coined it, but rejigged it. Alcohol was a name for Arabic eye makeup. But yeah, alcohol, as we understand it, it came from him. He came up with the term zinc, the term laudanum, and he came up with the term gas, which he actually pronounced achos. Anyways, he loved Neoplatonism, especially Neoplatonic ideas through Marsilio Ficino, who I will talk about at some point. He was a bit of an asshole. I'm just going to say that. He was a very headstrong character. A lot of people talked down on him, even in his time. But people seem to love what he was going for, this idea of the divine, and through your work, you are becoming this God-man that Zosimus talked about, and thus basically severing magic. Is that what people are doing on the streets and in their practical lives? That's not magic. That's sorcery. You can't do that. His students split. Half of them, basically, they went into medicine and medication, which, as you can see, did pretty good. And the other half, they just kind of abandoned their laboratories and they went seeking this spiritual gold. I'll do an episode on Paracelsus, absolutely. But what needs to be said is that he was a major force in recasting magic as personal enlightenment. Although he disagreed with Henrik Cornelius Agrippa, he certainly helped facilitate the Neoplatonic underlying metaphysics of magic. That's it. Roger Bacon. Got to talk about it. I love bacon. And apparently you love bacon as well.
If it's pea meal.
Yes. Canadian tradition, if you will. I love Roger Bacon, not so much for the things that he did in his life, but kind of the work that was attributed to him afterwards, like the brazen head, which was a head that could tell your future and whatnot. He also has a bunch of necromancy texts attributed to him, like De Negromancia, which I'm going through for probably like the 5th time right now. It's all about summoning the dead. It's the best. Anyways, didn't actually write it, but it was attributed to him. He was a Franciscan friar born in 1214. He died in 1294. He's considered the first true European alchemist. Practical experimentation was his thing. Following Aristotle, he placed experience and logic before belief for finding the truth. He still believed the Bible. He saw the Bible as all of the divine truth that exists in the world is in the Bible, but there's still some stuff that we should do just kind of on the periphery to try and get to a better understanding of the world that we live in. Don't burn me. He wrote about philosophy, language, astronomy, mathematics, optics, and anatomy in his major work, which is called the Opus Majus. He's the first European to record a formula for gunpowder. Gunpowder exists, as we all know, was invented in China. He was the first guy to actually take it apart, alchemically take it apart, find the things, and write the very first recipe. Yeah, for sure. He was an advocate for the study of nature through empiricism. It's like he is the guy that did this. The third notable figure that we're going to talk about is Mary Sidney. She is awesome. She's English. She was the Countess of Pembroke. She was born in 1561. She died in 1621. Considered one of the most learned women of her time. One of the first to be recognized for her contribution to writing and poetry in Tudor England. Her home, Wilton House, was like a college. People talk about it. It was kind of like a salon before there were salons. She was constantly surrounded by the brightest minds of England, and John Dee being there, etc. She was also an alchemist. The brother of Humphrey Gilbert, who himself is an amazing figure. He's going to get his own episode for sure. His brother, Adrian. With Mary Sidney, they did a lot of alchemical experiments at Wilton House. I love Mary Sidney. She is a force of nature. She had a fuck it, I'll do it myself personality that history needs to rediscover. She is amazing. Some people said that she not only wrote some of Shakespeare's sonnets, but she certainly helped him write some of them. But like the invisible ink that she invented, only a few can see her contribution to literature and Tudor England. Let's get to a somewhat modern alchemist. His name is R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch. Interesting figure. Very interesting figure. He's French. He was born in 1887. He died in 1961. He was a student of Matisse. He, like me, loved ancient Egypt. All the different opinions in ancient Egypt, specifically with their monuments, like the pyramids, the Sphinx being older than it actually is. This is the guy where it all came from. This one dude, R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch. He was certainly a practical alchemist. There's pics of his alchemical lab, but he was an esoteric one as well. He came up with what he called the intelligence of the heart as a way of perception, not unlike Owen Barfeld, who I've talked about before, of seeing into things. It's just actually see the heart of things. The Egyptians placed the place where we do our thinking at the heart as opposed to the brain. Schwaller de Lubitsch, he loved this. And the ancient Egyptians had this ability. He came up with the term symbolique, which is the ability to hold mutually exclusive ideas together simultaneously. Hieroglyphs are an example. So if you see the hieroglyphs of a bird, it's not just that what you're seeing is a bird, but it's also the entire idea of flight. Not just that, oh, a bird flies, but everything that we think of, the freedom of flight.
Very holistic.
Yeah, absolutely. He's fucking awesome. I love him. Besides his politics, I will just say that his middle name is Adolf. He's an absolutely interesting character to look up, and he will get his own episode as well, as I think that he's amazing. If people say like, nah, Doug, he's not really an alchemist, I say read his biography, Alchemy, and then see what you think after that. If you were a fan of Ian McGilchrist, as I am, actually, Patrick, it was you that introduced Ian McGilchrist to me, so I'm eternally thankful for the great,
you're welcome.
The great doctor,
yes,
the great Dr. McGilchrist. Intelligence of the heart is right brain perception at its purest. So instead of left brain perception, which is either or, right brain perception is more both and. And we can't have an episode about alchemy without talking about Jung, Carl Gustav C.G. Jung. There really could be a whole show about Jung and alchemy. Who knows, maybe sometime in the future. Jung was given a book by one of his friends, Richard Wilhelm. He did an introduction to Richard Wilhelm's book, which was a translation of the Chinese I Ching. Wilhelm gifted him a book called The Secret of the Golden Flower, and this was about Chinese alchemy specifically, and Jung was fascinated by this. So he started to pay attention to European alchemy. Suffice to say, he saw much in the symbols and their similarity to archetypal dream images. Jung is about the process of discovery of the immortal self, not from contemplation, but engagement. And he saw these images that the alchemists had in their art and in their writing was a framework to contextualize your journey of selfhood and soul, very much like the archetypes themselves. The great work as you live it. There is tons to be gleaned from Carl Jung and his study in alchemy, as well as books written after Jung, Mary Louise von Franz, and others. So much to go there. But I would ask, though, that people heed his words yet again, that there is no linear evolution, only a circumambulation of the self. His conclusions regarding the Philosopher's Stone, the spirit of Mercurius, the chemical wedding, the mercurial fountain, putrefaction, the ascent of the soul, the new birth or rebus, yeah, there's just tons and tons as far as Carl Jung is concerned. So, we have to talk now a bit about alchemy and science. Patrick, did you know that the first use of the term pseudoscience was in relation to alchemy?
No, I can't say I did. No.
Yeah. So it was James Pettit Andrews in 1796 when he wrote about alchemy. He said it was a pseudoscience. That's the first record that we have of the term pseudoscience. I think a lot of people involved in magic and the occult now, they say that science needs to understand where it came from. It came from alchemy, and it came from magic and magical thinking. And I'm going to argue, and I say it's not understated, guys. It's been well spoken for. The Penn State University Press has a series of books, which are all great, about magic in history. Everybody to this day that engages in science is kind of like, yes, we know exactly where it comes from. It's well spoken for. But I will say, I think the ideas as to why people engage in magical pursuits, that's something that maybe scientists need to, which is the pursuit of the meaning of life, souls, kind of more philosophical ideas because of the wonderful Cartesian split that happened, mind one place, matter in another place. Since then, we've relegated these things, and there's no such thing as a soul. And alchemy was merely a framework to figure things out in the time that it was around, things that were hidden, which was, for a period of time, was science. John Dee, he was arrested in 1555 and charged with many offenses, one of which was calculating. For a time, math was viewed as being suspicious. Like, it was really one of those things. He was eventually jailed for calculating, and among other things. He was released eventually. But Patrick, what to your understanding, as somebody as a student of science and the history of science, what do you think alchemy's contribution was to the process of science?
It's not fresh knowledge. It's stuff that I would have read some time back, but I think many techniques in what became chemistry are owed, many of the instruments that are used, so a lot of the facts, apparatus, techniques of what became chemistry are obviously rooted in these magicians and wizards, choking on sulfur. And you've kind of been getting at it as you've been talking, but this merger that happened in the ancient world of like the theological, the mysteries, there wasn't a hard and fast line yet between these things. And so the natural philosophers, who were these alchemists, they took in these ideas. They made the attribute to these gods or whatever, these hidden forces. So I don't know what the connection is in some straightforward way, but it seems like there is one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, not just with the equipment that they came up with. It was the search for truth by any means, what it came down to. I think one of the major things that is not talked about, though, as far as alchemy and science is the use of symbols, metaphor, and analogy. We have Robert Hooke, who, when he was looking at a piece of cork under a microscope, he looked at it and he said he saw all of these small compartments that almost looked like monks in a monastery. He said that, they kind of looks like monks in their cell. That's where we get the name self from. We have other things like the greenhouse effect. So this is something that is a holdover. That metaphor and analogy is kind of like the alchemists and symbols. There's kind of like the alchemist's wheelhouse.
Yes, and as you were speaking, it jumps to mind that probing and the metaphors during Dee and Hooke and Francis Bacon, that Tudor stage, especially in England, but I think echoed in other parts of Europe at that time. They openly talked about it as a sort of probing nature to reveal these secrets, what's hidden. You can see that.
Absolutely. Now, although these metaphors seem foreign to us, if you look at alchemical artwork, you're just like, what is this? I don't get it. There's hearts, there's roses, there's strange fountains, there's a green lion eating a sun, there's a snake that's swallowing its own tail. They might seem very foreign to us, but we have to realize that the metaphors that we use right now, in time, they will be viewed as strange, specifically when we are talking about science. Although I didn't really talk about it, I think that there is something for people to look into in the fact that Isaac Newton, centuries after he passed away, I forget who it was that wanted to buy his notebooks, trying to think that, there's probably more here, and was enormously disappointed that when they cracked them open, it was all about alchemy. Like every single one of them. He was, as much as we think of him as the ultimate scientist, he was more interested in the ephemeral. So he's kind of like that strange bridge point. I'm studying the hidden, but I also have great truths to tell in another realm. Let's get into a little bit of modern alchemy. It's a little bit of a Canadian story as well. In 1901, at McGill University in Montreal, there was a physicist, Ernest Rutherford and Frederick Soddy. They were going through the work of the Curies, trying to figure out more about the elements and radioactivity. So, as good alchemists, scientists do, they start experimenting, and eventually they succeeded in demonstrating that the atoms in radioactive materials disintegrate, so that the atoms of a radioactive element are transformed into another totally different element. Upon this finding, Frederick turned to Ernest and declared, "Rutherford, this is transmutation." To which Ernest replied, "For God's sake, Soddy, don't call it transmutation. They'll have our heads off as alchemists." Rutherford is instrumental in how the periodic table became the thing that it is today. The ambivalence that scientists have towards alchemy is understandable. Of course it is, but perhaps it requires a bit of recognition. As I said, not so much about the techniques and the technology, but more so was what was the final aim. What were these people actually really after? They were after big philosophical questions. That's something I think that maybe science needs to get in touch with a bit more. It can't all be this, like, we're just going for hard empirical data, I think, with some kind of a basis of, it doesn't have to be a theological distinction. I think we should maybe just, like, there's definite questions that people are asking right now, and have been asking for all the time, that science needs to look to. The work of Dean Radin is a great example of this. If science is indeed the magic of the West, then its main sorcery is physics. It is the way that we try to understand everything in this world. Physics is vast, and we have many branches of it. We have classical Newtonian mechanics, thermodynamics, electromagnetism, quantum mechanics, and more. The progress in these branches has been incredible, and they all seem to be pointing in some direction or kind of heading towards a specific point. Just like the alchemists of the past, physicists are seeking their own philosopher's stone, what is called the Grand Unified Theory. One theory through which all physics will be satisfied and explained, the keystone of everything that there is in this universe. Einstein himself was working on this Grand Unified Theory right before passing away, having never found it. Very popular example of this would be string theory. String theory, I don't know if I have to say. Basically, it is like within the smallest bits of matter, guys, there's tiny vibrating strings, and they can change and morph, and that's, yeah, anyways. The problem with these theories is that, like gold from metal in days of yore, there's almost zero way to prove this experimentally. Like the practical basis of alchemy, these grand unified theories just stay that. They're theories, and they become a philosophy. Again, just like alchemy. Despite how far we think we've come, some things are very, very familiar to us. What is the legacy of alchemy? I'm going to be quoting from the University of Waterloo, a fellow Canadian by the name of Dan Attrell, who's great. He said that alchemy, broadly speaking, was actually comprised of many different pursuits to many different people at many different junctures of history. It was a practical art with theoretical foundation, a material pursuit defined and given meaning by spiritual worldviews. It could be both or neither. It gave us some very interesting perspectives through writing and particularly art, is what I say. It is useful to today's magician, is it? It can be, but I think it needs to be contextualized in the time that it came about. If alchemy is interesting to you, this context needs to be confronted. I dislike the metaphysics of alchemy from the get-go, that you are in some way not already in an enlightened state. Neoplatonic alchemy posits that there are realms out of your reach unless you do certain things or something of the like, that you are flawed from the outset. Alchemy can make you gold. This enlightened being, this God-man, enlightened state, you are already. Shake your head and realize this, everybody. We are not some briefly haunted body in a fallen state. You already have the tools. You are here to co-create the world. This is what Jung was going after. This is the big thing. The universe is not some already complete puzzle with each piece needing to be taken out and carefully contemplated on before being set back so that you can move to the next piece. You are creating the fucking puzzle. Magic is where it's at. Not alchemy, guys. I hate to say it. And for this reason, I've never really resonated with alchemy. It all seemed very elitist, something the more well-off segment of society engaged with. My people, the magic that I loved was that of the cunning folk, the witches, the ones who were living their regular day lives. These were people that were actively engaging with their world. They weren't thinking about it. And that's what I like to head to. Remember what I said about the mystery tradition. Is this what you were actually after? Not magic. I'm not saying stay in your lane, everybody. I'm saying that the two can certainly work together, but what is it that you really want from magic? Apotheosis? Ask yourself why you're interested in this occult business. Really, that's one thing I want people to get from this episode. I see a ton of distinctions for people that get into magic when they're actually looking for the mystical tradition, this thing that we really hunger for. Alchemy was definitely along this line. While noble, alchemy and enlightened being directives tend to lead to massive disappointment. Guess what? You are not the center of the universe. Most of the time, the universe is very indifferent to you. You have to realize now that you are part of an ecosystem, both spiritually and mentally. You are the gold merely by being here. But while you're here, there is definitely work that needs to be done. Patrick, have you ever had red gold in your hand? No.
Is that a metal?
Yeah, no. It's gold, but my father was a geologist. I held it. It was a powder, and it just looks like red, like almost like baseball sand.
Oh yeah.
Almost, but you actually start to work it in your fingers and it becomes gold. It's one of the most crazy things that I've ever seen. You can understand why people are interested in gold itself, but that's us. We just need to, we're here, we're already gold. We just need a little bit of a reworking, guys. Just remember what Jung said about the circumambulation of the self. You are the gold merely by being here. While you do need work, it is there. Work on your journey. Engage. Do not contemplate too much. This is why so-called cunning folk manuscripts are far more functionally operative to me than any magnus opus like the Basilicus Chemicus. I admire the look and the feel of alchemy, but once grasped, move on, I say. It had its time, it had its place, and its metaphysics need reworking. Jung is on the right path, as is R.A. Schwaller-Dillovich. Look there, guys. Your magnum opus can be written with the tools you already have, and the gold you seek is everywhere around you, including you. Congratulations. What are you going to do with this gold? And that's the episode, Patrick.
Oh, thanks. You ended on an inspiring note. I'm rather impressed.
Well, guys, what now? So I say the first thing you need to do to look at some alchemical artwork. There's a great book that my friend Patrick actually bought for me, released by Taschen. It's called Alchemy and Mysticism. It's worth getting, specifically the smaller copy, not the larger. I think it's $500.
I didn't get that one.
No.
I confess.
But I think that look at some of the work. It's really quite cool. Juice Ritman, who was a Dutch businessman, he made his fortune basically selling like cutlery to airlines in Europe. He was interested in alchemy and Hermeticism and Neoplatonism. He has the largest Hermetic library in the world. It used to be called the Hermetic Library. I think at one time it was called the Ritman Library. It has now changed its name. It is now called the Embassy of the Free Mind. I don't know. It's I don't know. But yeah, there's that whole Paracelsian high magic thing. I'm just like,
Paracelsian or Paracelsian?
Paracelsian.
Oof.
Sorry.
Yikes. How many of these guys are there?
Slap on the wrist there. They have an online collection. I think they're working on the website right now, but there's some really cool things to look up there. Robert M. Place, he is kind of a scholar in magic and mysticism. He's got a bunch of books on alchemy. They're pretty good. He also came up with what is called the Alchemical Tarot. It is one of my favorite tarot decks. It is very pretty to look at. It's not a deck I really functionally use too often, but it's maybe the prettiest tarot deck to my mind. One of them. It's up there. Cherry Gilchrist, fantastic head there. There's a book by Tobias Churton called The Golden Builders. If you want to see more of this Neoplatonic, like, this is the true point of magic kind of thing, that's probably one of the better books you can go for. Mitya Eliade, he wrote The Crucible and the Forge. Fantastic book. Really good. Look it up. The guy that I mentioned earlier, Dan Atro, from the University of Waterloo. He has a video. I'm going to put it in the show notes. It is a wonderful video. Have a watch of that. Look also at how other cultures viewed alchemy, I'd say. David Gordon White, he wrote a book called The Alchemical Body about Indian alchemy, and it is wonderful. It is a very, very cool book. There's a book called Jung on Alchemy. Patrick, you also gave me this book.
What? I wish I kept it.
It's a fantastic book. It's probably my favorite book on how, and it's quite short, but it's the most succinct example of how Jung viewed alchemy. It's wonderful. Also, R.A. Schwaller-Dillovich, I say head there, guys. He's really cool. Maybe read his biography, Alchemy, first, and then go into his work. The way that he writes is very, it's mystical and strange, but stick with it. It's great. His book that was released after he died called Nature Word is maybe one of my favorite books ever. It's great. Look it up. It's fantastic. other than that, guys, there's so many places to go. There's so much. There's tons and tons and tons. Alchemy was very popular, and scholars have been studying it for almost as soon as it started becoming a thing. So the show notes for this episode, they're not going to be too vast, unfortunately. But yeah, Patrick, that's the episode on alchemy.
Thanks for including me, and I'm congratulations to this wonderful thing you got going here. And
buddy, stop it.
I'm glad to be part of it.
For those interested, head to whatmagicisthis.com. There you're going to find links to my Facebook, my Twitter, and my Instagram page. Also there you're going to find show notes for each and every episode I do. Guys, I go out of my way for these show notes. They're awesome. I think the one I did on ancient Egypt might have been my longest one. Anyways, doesn't matter. Head there. You'll get a really good reading list. That's one thing that people tend to comment about, is that after I listen to your show, I have a huge wish list on Amazon, or I just have a list of books to read. Keep it up, and I will. Less so maybe for this episode, but head there, whatmagicisthis.com, for those show notes. Also, guys, if you like the podcast, leave me a rating somewhere. It's much appreciated. People are starting to cotton on to this podcast. It's well appreciated. If you can say a little something nice about me on iTunes, that would be wonderful. Oh, guys, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'm getting quite a few questions every week. It's been nice, so the show is catching on, and I really appreciate that. Other than that, guys, thank you for listening. This has been wonderful, and we have to end the show with the post-show quid pro quo. Patrick, are you ready?
Yes, I have to be. I have to be. Let's do it.
Patrick, what do you think, as somebody who studies Greek culture quite a bit, how did you see the way that the Greeks saw what would be the idea of happiness, as opposed to how we see the idea of happiness right now?
Well, my mind immediately jumps to Aristotle.
Okay.
I don't think he coined the word, but he wrote about it in his Ethics. And I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but eudaimonia. It gets translated as a kind of thriving, a fullness of being. It's there's no lags or gaps or holes in one's life. It's a full thriving in, on your own terms, in your relationships, in your work, in your health. It's not about being the best person. It's not a competitive thing. And that's what the purpose of all action is to get to this state of, broadly speaking, thriving.
Right.
Happiness would be subsumed under it.
Awesome.
I don't know what... I can't speak to what...
What do you think most people think... Sorry, I only got one question, but what do you think most people would think happiness is now?
I feel it's almost a kind of a negative happiness, in that you want to avoid turmoil, avoid too much debt. Yeah. Avoid illness.
Happiness by negation of certain aspects of your life?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Stoicism is coming back with a vengeance. And, this idea of tranquility and, calm amidst the storm, and kind of removing oneself from the busyness of the world to achieve some kind of neutral state. But I can't say, that's about as good as I can muster at this.
Perfect. No, that's great. Great answer, Patrick. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'd love to have you back on again, if you would.
Of course.
Perfect. Patrick, I got to say, I love you, bud.
Love you too, Doug.
And this has been wonderful having you on here, and we'll have to do this again sometime. Thank you for listening to What Magic Is This? My name is Douglas Batchelor. Tune in again, and we'll go through some more of this magic stuff. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. Stay luminous, and we'll talk at you soon. Bye-bye.